Hello my loves, my name is Hannah and welcome to a new reading vlog. If you've been on my channel before, you will probably know that this year is my year of reading impatiently, by which I mean not saving those books that I think I'm gonna love for a rainy day, getting to the books that I really want to read sooner. So every month this year I have done a vlog where I sit down on the first of the month and pull 4 titles off my shelves that I'm just excited to read that month, and that is the theme for the vlog. So there's no other sort of thematic links between things, it's just 4 books that I want to read, a mixture of new releases, backlist titles, classics, who knows, just whatever I fancy. So I have just pulled my 4 titles. Well, actually I've pulled 3 books because the first one is the most impatient book that I have included in one of these vlogs to date, because it isn't even out yet. But I will be reading, because I have pre-ordered it and it will be arriving in about 10 days, Private Rites by Julia Armfield. So this is her second novel. Our Wives Under the Sea is one of my favourite books that I've read in recent years. I love it. It is incredibly beloved by most of my friends, and so we're all very excited to read her second novel. As all I know about it is that it's a dystopian, I think like climate dystopian book that is about sibling rivalry. So it's about 3 sisters. So it's set in a dystopian future where it is raining constantly. It just doesn't stop raining. And yeah, I think I said before that she wrote about water so beautifully in Our Wives Under the Sea that I'm excited to see her returning to a heavy water theme. So that is one book that we'll be reading in this vlog, but obviously I don't have my copy of it yet, so that will probably be the last one I read in this vlog. And then I have a book which technically I got from the library, so it is an impatient one in that it's been on my radar for a long time, but it's not one that I've literally pulled from my own bookcases. But this is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, with a big pride sticker on, because that's what my library does to any gay book. So yeah, this is will be the first novella that I've read of James Baldwin's. I've read a lot of his like essays before and like little bits and pieces of his writing, and I think he's a really beautiful writer, but I haven't read a novel or a piece of fiction by him before, which is nuts. So I'm really looking forward to this. I think this is set in Paris and follows like an American man who falls in love with a man called Giovanni. Yeah, so we got that. And then we have, this is not only a book that I've been meaning to get to for ages, it's an author that I've been meaning to get to for ages. So many people have told me that they think I will love Max Porter's writing, and I think I will love Max Porter's writing, and for some reason I still haven't read any of his work. So we're rectifying that in this vlog. And the timing is actually really good for this too, because this is Jen Campbell's Patreon book club pick for June. So that's given me the little shove that I need to finally pick it up. So this is a sort of very experimental literary book that is dealing with grief, in which a husband whose wife has just died, him and his child, his son? I'm not sure, but his child is, they're sort of dealing with the grief of losing their mother and wife, and it's got an embodiment of The Crow from the Ted Hughes poem. So looking forward to that one. And then another experimental book, the final one, is Blackouts by Torres, and I bought this when I was in Paris earlier this year, which if you haven't seen it, I vlogged my experience there, and this is from Shakespeare and Company, because of course you have to go to Shakespeare and Company when you're in Paris. So I picked this up there, and it's got my lovely Shakespeare and Co stamp in it. And I've heard really good things about this, but I know almost nothing about it. So I think it is a bit blending fact and fiction. It looks like it's told in these little vignettes, but then it's also got these like redacted sections. Honestly, this one is going to be just a bit of a discovery, because I don't know much about it except that it's very experimental and it's queer and is doing a lot with like historical records. Like, who knows? I'll just read the book and let you know. So those are the 4 books that I will be reading in this video. And I think I'm going to start with Blackouts because that's the chunkiest one. And yeah, I will check in with you when I have something to say. In the meantime, there'll be some B-roll of something coming up now. See you later.
Happy birthday to Lewin. Can you sit? Happy birthday to Lewin. Sit down, day, dear Lewin. Happy birthday to you. He's 4. Yay. Wait. Okay. Where's Taz, Lewin? Has he gone on the floor? Is he down there? Oh no.
Oh no.
There's no way for him to get.
There's no way for Taz to get off the floor.
There's absolutely no way.
There's nothing to be done.
There's nothing that Lewin can do. Oh, he looks quite sad down there, Lewin. Poor Taz. Where's Taz?
He's going to stay down there forever, Lou. How can he get off the floor?
I think this is another thing that I've been a bit concerned about.
Hello. It's been a minute since I checked in with you. We're actually halfway through June. And I'm here to talk to you about Blackouts, which I finished a week ago. And since then, I've just slumped a bit. No reflection on the book or actually anything else I'm reading. I'm really enjoying all the books I'm reading at the minute, but I have just finished this week wrapping up that Euros reading, like finished all the reading, recorded the first half of the video last week, finished it this week, and I just feel a little bit slumpy now, because I think I've got a bit of a hangover from that challenge. Oh, hi baby. Lewin's just had his dinner, which he had to be convinced to eat, so he may need to. Yeah, have you been brave? You're so good. You gonna lie down? Good boy, settle. I don't know why I've been reluctant to talk to you about this book, and I'm not 100% sure why. Possibly just because I've talked about too many books in too short an amount of time, and a little bit like wanted to do this justice, which I've just made peace, I think, with the fact that I'm not going to be able to do that. But we have read Blackouts, and I thought it was phenomenally good. I really loved it. I really loved it. I think it's going to be quite a divisive book. I don't think it's going to be everyone's cup of tea, but it was hitting all my sweet spots. So this is about 2 men, and there is an older man called Juan, he's dying in this facility called the Palace, which is like this crumbling old institution in the desert. And he's being cared for by our narrator, who's a much younger man, who, for reasons that aren't immediately clear to us, has come to take care of Juan. And even though they've only met once before, and we find out they met once before when they were both patients at a mental institution. And for whatever reason, our narrator has felt compelled to come and care for Juan. And the book is a series of back and forth recollections, conversations, and stories that the two are telling each other in this darkened room, because Juan kind of can't tolerate sunlight anymore. So they're basically like lying in the dark and sharing these stories of their lives. And so it covers things like racism and their experiences as both being queer men of very different generations, and that in itself is really interesting. It's beautifully poetically written, like stunning. I underlined so much stuff. And so through these back and forth conversations that kind of meander through time, and parts of the book are really like vignette-y, so you don't have huge big chunks of text. I think the longest section was maybe about 5 pages. And there are parts of it that are very clearly conversation. There are parts of it where it's very clearly one of them telling a story to another. And there's parts of it where they're making up stories, or there's this really beautiful part that I absolutely loved where they're telling each other stories of their life, but they're narrating it as if it was a film. And so there's so much playfulness in the storytelling techniques. I thought it was so good. And it would have been amazing if it was just that. But interwoven through this, in Juan's room, there are these boxes of materials that have been gathered. We don't know by whom. We don't know exactly how they came into Juan's possession, but they're predominantly about a real woman called Jan Grey, who was a kind of pioneering queer sexologist. So the book is also telling this kind of under-explored history of the legacy of this woman's contribution to understanding of sexual identities and psychology, which has been largely suppressed by her kind of male peers. And so we get kind of parts of a book that she'd written, but most of the documents have all been redacted like this, and we don't know who redacted them. We don't know if Juan redacted them. We don't know if he discovered them redacted. And they read like blackout poetry. So here, and this is literally, I haven't chosen this part in much, this is just the first one that I turned to. It says, homo, to nestling, to be held in the lap of a man, to kiss him and be petted by him, to press his face against the buttocks of men, to have been associated with his male teachers, to the penis, to observe the penis, to masturbation and passive sodomy, to engage in oral caresses of the penis of his brother-in-law, to experience, to kiss the penis, to act like a man, to get an erection, to penetrate, to complete the act, to be satisfied, to satisfy them, to discuss his sexual problems with the lesbian, to make the brother happy, to sacrifice himself, to embrace him, to lie on top of him, to merge with him, to be like a woman, to use his mouth to accomplish this, to satisfy his sexual desires, to go on, to be relieved of all sex feelings, to do anything, to be a crash. But you can see how much has actually been redacted from those lines, and some of them are like absolutely beautiful. What's happened here? Yeah, so you've got those really beautiful poetic kind of like interludes that are interspersed throughout. So you're also uncovering personal queer histories alongside a kind of wider excavation of a really important person, of this queer anthropologist. And I thought it was just so clever. But like there was so much that it's quite hard to kind of pick and choose the things that I want to talk about. It also, alongside having the blackout poetry throughout, has a series of like lots of photographs and stuff throughout. Some are artworks, but there's like lots and lots of stuff throughout it. So it feels really, really quite encyclopedic in terms of like what it's trying to capture, in terms of like the way that marginalized identities, because it's not just about queer identities, there's also a lot in here about both these men Puerto Rican, and there's also a lot about the kind of treatment of Latinx and South and Central American people in America, particularly throughout history. So there's like a lot of like cultural conversation that's happening, but I just was so fascinated by both of these men too. I thought their relationship was really interesting and warm and tender. I think the way that sex, particularly queer sex, is spoken about in this book is incredibly nuanced. And I thought it was so fantastic. It doesn't have like tons of like a clear narrative arc, although you do go on a journey of discovery with the characters, and there is kind of denouement at the end. But like the reason I think it would be quite a divisive book is that like it is, as I said, told in these quite short, sharp chunks. You have to do a fair amount of joining the dots together as a reader. And also, yeah, it might not work for people that do just want like more of a firm narrative throughout the book. But yeah, I thought it was extraordinary. I think it's going to be one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I mean, we'll see, because next in July I will film a like best books of the year so far video. I feel like I've said that about a lot of books, so we'll just have to see. So I finished that, as I said, about a week ago, and really enjoyed it. Thought it was wonderful. And then I picked up Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, and within like a sentence was like, oh, I'm gonna fucking love this, because I think I mentioned earlier that I've only ever read James Baldwin's non-fiction before. I've read his essays before, but I've never read his fiction before. I have seen adaptations of some of his work, like If Beale Street Could Talk. But yeah, this is the first of his sort of creative fiction writing that I've encountered. And where I sometimes found his non-fiction prose to be like just a smidge pretentious, I don't find that at all in his fiction writing. And I'm halfway through this now. I'm probably going to finish it tonight. But I am really loving it. It's just, I've just, like I said, been in a bit of a reading slump. I started reading this the day I finished that. So it's taken me a week to read 70 pages, but like that sounds bad, but I think it's just my brain has been quite like not with it. I've just not really been reading over the last week. So it's definitely not about the book, but now that Euro stuff is sort of boxed off and done, I'm feeling like I can really get stuck back into reading, and I read another chunk of it today, and I think this book is going to hurt my feelings so badly. I can feel the pain coming. So, yeah, I'll catch up with you properly about that when I finish, but I am gutted that this is a library edition. I'm definitely going to have to buy a copy, because this is going to go on the reread pile. And there are sentences in here that I wish I could have underlined. But I will catch up with you about that when I have read some more of it. Hello. I've been avoiding you. I've been avoiding you, and I don't know why. So I think I just haven't felt like filming. And I think it's maybe, I think I mentioned in the last clip about, I just think the Euros, I did ultimately enjoy it. I didn't always enjoy reading the books, but like, I filmed like that back to back, those two videos, like the group stages and the knockout stages, like within a week, and it was a lot of talking about a lot of books and having to hold a lot of stuff in my head and failing to hold a lot of stuff in my head. And I just think it's depleted me a little bit. So I have two books to talk to you about because I've only just, well, I say I've only just felt able to record. I did actually try and record a little bit yesterday. I tried to review Giovanni's Room yesterday, and it was a really good lesson for me in not filming if I don't feel like filming, because it was absolute fucking shite while I was talking nonsense. So we're gonna try again today. I'm feeling much better. I have actually put more than like 5 seconds thought into what I want to say about these books now, so that's good. It is absolutely roasting here today, and yeah, if the light changes, like, sorry about it. I can't be bothered to try and close it and set up a lamp. It's just that it's too hot. It's too hot to be bothered. So sorry. So yeah, first book I'm going to talk about is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, and I really loved this book. So this is about a young man called David, a young American man. He is currently living in Paris at the start of the book, and is just sort of very much doing that American in Europe vibe thing. Like, he's trying to live this sort of bohemian life, and he is in a relationship with a woman called Hella. And at the start of the book, we know that she has just gone to Spain to do some like finding of herself and inner reflection to see if she wants to accept David's marriage proposal. And while she is in Spain, David begins a relationship with an Italian bartender called Giovanni. And that is sort of the book. But what Baldwin does with the structure of it is that we know from like the third page that, because the book is told kind of in with hindsight, essentially, and with David reflecting on this brief relationship that he had with Giovanni. And we know from very early on that their relationship ends, that it ends badly, and that something happens that means that Giovanni is in prison and potentially going to be executed. And we know that that's not a spoiler. We're told that like on the third page of the book. And what that structure then does is, so we know that it's ended, and then we go back and see the beginning, and then we go check back in on the present, and then we go back to the past and we check back in on the present. And what that does is it sort of imbues the prose with this sort of fatalistic inevitability that makes what is a very sad story even sadder. So like, not one, like, not necessarily a Pride Month read, not exactly the queer joy of it, very much the queer tragedy of it, but still a beautiful book nonetheless. I thought David was such an interesting character, because you felt for him, but also he was dealing with so much internalized homophobia. He doesn't even think of himself as being a queer man necessarily, despite the fact that he had slept with like a male friend of his when he was like a teenager, and then sort of very quickly repressed it, like acted like it didn't happen, cut the friend out of his life. And since then he hasn't had any kind of like romantic or sexual entanglement with another man until he meets Giovanni. And he almost seems to like resent the feelings that he has for Giovanni, and his sort of frustration that he feels as a character. All of that repression means that he's not often very likable. I think people who have a lot of self-hatred and a lot of self-loathing often project that in ways that are not pleasant, and David definitely does do that. And that can kind of, it manifests in David in some particularly like not pleasant opinions about women. He's the reason he first meets Giovanni is because he's sort of kind of being courted, like he doesn't have much money, and so he ends up being sort of like taken in by these like older queer men, and sort of like lets them flirt with him and lets them sort of buy his drinks and stuff, but is like deeply disgusted by them. And so some of the times when he's talking about like how he feels about those characters, it can be really uncomfortable reading. But overall, I think the way that like Baldwin explores the like stuck between a rock and a hard place of like this closeted experience that David has was just really, it was really expertly done. It was really sensitively done, but like really painful to read about. Let me read you a bit. So this is from page 11, which is the third page of the book. These nights were being acted out under a foreign sky with no one to watch, no penalties attached. It was this last fact which was our undoing, for nothing is more unbearable once one has it than freedom. I suppose this was why I asked her, Hella, to marry me, to give myself something to be moored to. Perhaps this was why, in Spain, she decided she wanted to marry me. But people can't, unhappily, invent their mooring posts, their lovers and their friends, any more than they can invent their parents. Life gives these and also takes them away. And the great difficulty is to say yes to life. So it's interesting talking about like mooring posts there, because there is this like tension in the imagery that Baldwin uses throughout the book of articulating David is at once desperately wants to be free, hates the idea of being trapped or contained or attached, and yet also has this real dissatisfaction with sort of wandering through life aimlessly, and it feels like he's trying to find a way of feeling both fixed and secure, but also free in his relationships and in his life, in the way he moves through the world. So like if you compare that with like another bit a little bit later on, but not much later on, because I'm going to avoid reading from like later in the book because I don't want to spoil anything. What happened was that, all unconscious of what this ennui meant, I wearied of the motion, wearied of the joyless seas of alcohol, wearied of the blunt, bluff, hearty and totally meaningless friendships, wearied of wandering through the forests of desperate women, wearied of the work which fed me only in the most brutally literal sense. And there's another bit, a page later. So there's like a lot of like imagery of like moving, I think things that move and things that anchor and things that fix things, and whether something is moving or not moving. And like literally like a page later, he says, Yeah, my father had money in his account which belonged to me, but he was very reluctant to send it because he wanted me to come home. To come home, as he said, and settle down. And whenever he said that, I thought of the sediment at the bottom of a stagnant pond. And so when he meets Giovanni, it's like he has found one of those mooring posts. He's found someone to sort of fix to himself. And he sort of moves into his room, into Giovanni's room, and this is where we get the title of the book. And yet that room, over the course of the book, becomes more and more limiting and more stifling, and he begins to feel more and more claustrophobic in it. And one of the struggles that he has as a character is almost like he's said yes to this mooring post. He's said yes to life in seeing Giovanni, and yet because of the fact of their love being a queer love that is not kind of like broadly accepted, although like in the like there's like a gay scene and stuff in Paris even at this time, and they can be out sort of in certain spaces, but like you feel that pressure that is put on their relationship because it's not able to have the sort of breath and air around it that straight relationships or straight presenting relationships are able to have. And I just thought it was articulated really well in the book, and like I said, it was really beautiful, but really sad. Really sad. Giovanni as a character, I loved him so much, and I think he was a perfect foil in lots of ways for David. Really enjoyed it. Well, enjoy, maybe not the word, but beautiful. I mean, within just a beautiful prose writer. I think I said that before in the little clip that I filmed of this before. So yeah, beautiful prose writer. Desperately sad book. And then I have also read Private Rites by Julia Armfield, and I was trying really hard to not hype this book too much in my head because I loved Our Wives Under the Sea so much. And on the whole, I really liked it. I really liked it. I thought it was great. I didn't like it as much as I liked Our Wives Under the Sea, but I really loved that book. So it's okay that I didn't love this one quite as much, but let's talk about it. So this follows three sisters called Isla, Irene, and Agnes. And at the start of the book, one of the sisters finds out that their father has just passed away. And so the book is dealing with the immediate fallout of his death. And it becomes very clear from the outset that none of the daughters had a good relationship with their father, and nor do they have a good relationship with each other. So there's Isla and Irene, who are the oldest sisters. Isla is the oldest. She's in her mid-30s. Then Irene is the second sister, and she's only about a year younger than Isla. And then there's a big jump of 10 years between them and Agnes, because Agnes was the child of their father's second marriage after Irene and Isla's mum. They divorced, and then I think she died not long after they divorced. But the dad was, it's implied, having an affair with Agnes's mother prior to that, and they ended up getting married like 2 months after the divorce came in. So all of this is essentially to illustrate that it was a bit messy. Their relationship dynamics are messy, and in lots of ways, with a big 10-year gap like that, their experiences of childhood, of their father and of the house that they lived in were very different, and all of that kind of comes to play out in the book. And really, the book is about their relationships with each other. As with Our Wives Under the Sea, what Julia Armfield's like, I think what her superpower is as a writer is like really carefully observed characterization. Like, she's so detailed and specific in how she describes characters. You really get the sense that she has really thought through the psychology of all three of these sisters, and I thought that was like brilliantly done. Let's give you some examples. Let me give you some examples. I made a note of some page numbers to read you a few bits. We'll do some quick fire ones. So this is Isla, so the eldest sister, describing her dad. He listened only ever with the effect of one attempting to maintain his train of thought over unpleasantly loud music, repeating the ends of people's sentences with an irritable upward inflection when asked if he'd been paying attention. You said that you're unsure if that's the direction you wanted your career to go. I heard you. And I was like, oh, that is... So there's that. Then there's... Let's see. Oh, yeah. This bit I thought was really interesting. So... This is Irene, said second sister. There are, Irene always felt, few frustrations to match that of being read a certain way by family members. To be misunderstood is one thing, but the curious hostility of a sibling's approach lies less in what they miss than in the strange backdated nature of the things they choose to know. So this idea that your siblings, because you've grown up together, you have this narrative and idea in your head of who they are as a person. And so even if that is very far removed from the person they are in the present moment, all of that is going to be coloured by the person that you decided they were when they were 5 years old or 6 years old or 10 years old or whatever. And just the messiness of their relationships, I thought was like really like chewy to read. It was a wider cast than Our Wives Under the Sea, and I think I did struggle at points very early on, particularly with the two eldest sisters having such similar names, like Isla and Irene. It took me a little minute to be like, wait, which one's which? Which one's the oldest? Which one's the therapist? Who's got the partner called Jude? So like, it took me a minute, but like, I think having the wider cast gave her a lot more opportunities to kind of explore more of those dynamics, which I found really interesting. Although there were two random sort of, because the chapters are split into like multiple POVs, so you get like a bit from Isla, then a bit from Irene, then a bit from Agnes, but it's always in a different order, and sometimes they're really short and sometimes they're a little bit longer. And then randomly, like in the middle of the book, or maybe about 2/3 of the way through, you got one section from Jude, which is Irene's partner, and then one from Stephanie, which is Agnes's girlfriend. And like, it just felt kind of random because you'd heard only from the sisters and one other perspective, which I'll talk about in a sec, throughout the whole book. And then there were just these two random ones, and I wasn't 100% sold on like how that fitted. But let's read to you a little bit more. So 145. Oh yeah, so speaking of the siblings, this is like a little exchange that Isla and Irene have, because basically Isla and Irene have this really like bickering sibling relationship, whereas like, because Agnes is so much younger than them and they've got that big age gap, and they basically like left home as soon as they could when they went to university at like 18, when Agnes was only like 7 or 8. So they don't know her in the same way. So theirs is more of like an estrangement or like a lack of familiarity, whereas Isla and Irene really kind of like know each other in some ways. And this is like an exchange that the two of them have about halfway through the book. And we start with, this is Isla speaking. Moved rooms, she says, by way of greeting, and then, what's the matter with you? Nothing is the matter with me, Irene says stiffly, but thank you. I didn't mean you looked bad, I just meant you were frowning, Isla says. There's no need to start rolling your eyes because I asked how you were. You didn't ask how I was, Irene says. And Isla holds up her hand. Like, they have this just really like, Isla is like such an elder sister and Irene is such a middle child. And I mean, as a middle child myself, I was slightly biased towards Irene in this book. So those relationships and stuff is all stuff I really liked. The kind of exploration of those dynamics I thought was great. And that's kind of the character stuff that's going on in the book. But then obviously, as I mentioned in, I think, the intro to this video, there's also like a world moment thing happening. So the backdrop of the world that they're living in is it's London, but it's like this near future / alternate present. It's not 100% clear like what year it is in the book, and I actually really liked that ambiguity. And climate breakdown has happened, or has happened more fully than it's currently happened, and it has been raining basically for about 25 years. The landscape has completely changed. Everything is like waterlogged. There's water everywhere. They've had to, and their dad made a name for himself. He was an architect for kind of pioneering like these basically like houses on stilts that rich people could live in, because they were very expensive. Rich people could live in, that would sit them like above the water, and that the houses would rise with the tides. And I think like it will cut, if you've read Our Wives Under the Sea, it will come as no surprise to you that Julia Armfield is beautiful at describing water. Like, she's brilliant at it. And I thought the world building and the attention to detail that was there was really, really interesting. And the other perspective that I mentioned earlier is every chapter has 1 or 2 sections that are just the city. And it kind of gives a broader look at the world. And while I found those sections interesting, I didn't always think narratively that they tied in very, very well. And I actually think some of that content I would have liked to see maybe threaded through the character perspectives a little bit more, and that might have felt a little bit more organic. But I also think that could have felt more expositional, so I can see why she did it the way that she did it. But sometimes I felt like those sections didn't always fit. But what she really captures beautifully in the book is a sort of dystopian setting, but as a slow descent into dystopia. And it's a book that's very preoccupied with the slowness of the unraveling of the world. Almost like this idea that it's not like this like quick thing that happened. It's very slowly happened, and that even as they're like in the middle of this world that is like unrecognizable from the world that you and I live in, the people are very much the same in like not a good way. As it's what she's exploring is almost the way that people adapt, and that sometimes the way we adapt is not actually helpful, because sometimes what we need to do is not adapt to the situation in order to be able to like actually combat what's happening, or actually be aware of what's going on. And so there's this tension, different characters throughout the book, between like whether they adapt or whether they stay fixed, and whether they are really able to witness. There's a lot about witnessing happening in the book, and again I think that's why she included the city in there as almost this like extra totem viewpoint throughout the book. But there's lots of like characters watching each other, observing each other, witnessing the world, lots of like imagery through windows. There's lots of reflections through water. The water works also as a kind of extended metaphor for sort of plumbing the depths of their relationships and trying to peer back into the past, but things are looking murky and obscured as they are through water. You see where we're going? It's very cleverly done. That makes it, I think some of those things I talked about make it sound like it's clunky. It's not clunkily done. There's also characters at various points that feel like they're being looked at specifically. There's things that are witnessed but not witnessed. There's also, and this was one of the problems I had with the book actually, there's things that you don't get to witness as a reader. So like something will happen off the page and you'll think you're about to see it then when you switch perspective. But when you go into the next chapter, it's like 4 months later. And you don't actually get to see the thing that you thought you were going to see. And that I got it, but it was frustrating. And there was also, on the theme of sort of like witnessing and performance, there were quite a few instances where like the characters are almost like imagining their lives as if they were a film or as if they're being watched. There's like one bit where Jude, as I said, is Irene's partner and they're non-binary. And just a side note, I absolutely fucking loved Jude. And I really liked the way Julia Armfield like wrote about Jude, in that like I could picture them really clearly, but also they didn't like, Julia Armfield didn't describe them in an overly like physical way, and so you had no idea as a reader whether Jude was assigned male or female at birth, and that was so fucking great to read as a non-binary character. I just thought it was great. Anyway, so Jude is standing in the doorway looking the way Jude tends to look, kind of hot and kind of like they've been airlifted in from another genre of TV show. And Jude really did feel like that. Like, there's these messy women who are like just not able to grasp, and then Jude is like so together. I loved Jude. And then there's another example of, this is Agnes, and it's the start of one of Agnes's sections. It says, waking suddenly, the jackknife all at once motion of a woman in a novel thrown out of a dream that was pertinent to the plot. So there's like quite a lot of like sort of like wink wink nudge nudges to the reader that I enjoyed. However, I did have a couple of problems with the book. Not biggies. Like I said, I still really liked it. I still think it was really good. And I'm surprised by one of these issues. Sometimes the prose didn't work for me. And I don't know what sometimes I think the rhythm, it felt like there were too many ideas or too many pieces of imagery jammed into too short an amount of like line space, and it just every so often I found myself really tripping up on the prose. Now that could have just been like me and my mental state as I was reading it, like it could be, but it didn't always, the prose didn't always flow for me the way I remember the prose flowing in Our Wives Under the Sea, or indeed the way it flowed when it was flowing at its best in this book. But the main thing I had was a kind of like at a story level, because I found these characters really interesting, but I wasn't really, and the world, so the characters were interesting and the world was interesting, but I felt like it lacked story. And it felt like it was a really well-crafted situation, but that it didn't always know where it was going. And then you get a reveal about 20 pages from the end of the book that sort of snaps it into a storyline arc, but it's so late on in the book that like I genuinely don't know how I feel about that reveal or how I feel about the ending of this book. I am very unsure, because a part of me thinks I hated it. A part of me thinks it was a really good way of subverting what I might have thought was coming. Yeah, I don't know. But it's currently Sunday, and on Tuesday, so I've got a conference in London on Wednesday, and on Tuesday night, Julia Armfield has a book event in Kingston in London, which is like my old stomping ground. It's where I was born, and I'm going to go to that. So I'm going to a book event in 2 days' time for this book, and we will see if I have changed my mind after hearing. It's the sort of thing where I think hearing her talk about it might sell me one way or another. I can be quite impressionable as a reader sometimes, so we will see. But 2 really good books. I'm a bit on the fence with this one, and I wasn't expecting to be on the fence with a Julia book, but this just shows that I'm giving you honest reviews here, guys. But yeah, so probably the next time you will see me, I will have been to the Julia Armfield event, and hopefully I will have read the Max Porter, and we'll be wrapping the video up. Oh, I've been talking for quite a long time. See you in a bit. Hi, I'm back home. The Julia Armfield event was really good. It was quite like informal. It was funny. She was being interviewed by Alison Rumfitt, who's also an author who wrote like Tell Me I'm Worthless and Brainworms. But they're really good friends, so it had more of like a podcasty vibe than some book talks that I've been to. Like, I kind of would have liked it to be a bit more like nerdy and about the writing, and there was a lot about like Hammer horror that I wasn't expecting. But anyway, I don't think it massively changed my mind though, in terms of how I feel about the book. She did say something interesting about the city, those bits, and how she was deliberately trying to draw the reader's attention to certain points so that they missed other things. And I think I'd probably have to reread the book to know how on board I am with that. But she was very nice, and she signed a picture of my friend's cat, because my friend Sarah has a beautiful cat called Nancy, and Sarah once put a picture of Nancy lying next to Our Wives Under the Sea, and Julia Armfield had commented on that picture and said that Nancy was an exceptional cat. And obviously this was a great moment for Sarah, and so I brought a picture all the way from Newcastle to Kingston to get Julia Armfield to sign this picture, and we gave her a picture of Nancy. She reconfirmed that Nancy is an exceptional cat. So that was that, and then I did read Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and I'm sorry if I talk a bit quick and if I'm a bit more all over the place than normal in this section, but I'm actually recording this about 3 hours before this video is being uploaded to my channel, so I don't have much time to process. I read this mostly yesterday, so I started it on Tuesday and then I finished it on Wednesday, and to everyone who said I was gonna love Max Porter, you were right. I really did love this. I loved this book. I wasn't sure about it at first. So as I said in the introduction, this is about a man who is referred to throughout the book just as Dad, and he has recently lost his wife, and he has two sons, actually. I think I said a son before, but he has two sons who are referred to as the boys. And in the depths of his grief, he is visited by a sort of physical manifestation, or possibly a metaphysical manifestation, or possibly a psychological manifestation of Crow, from the Ted Hughes collection of poems. Now, if you've already tuned out, don't worry, because I knew about Crow, but I haven't read Ted Hughes's collection Crow, and I was worried at first that I was not going to be able to access this book because I hadn't read that poetry collection. And at first, when Crow first appears, the way his voice is articulated, or their voice is articulated, ooh, is Crow gendered? I don't think Crow is gendered. So the way that Crow speaks is very fragmented and it's very playful, and it does remain playful throughout the book, but it's really quite hard to get into that voice at first. But it sort of mellows as the book continues and you get a feel for it. So this is just a really, really playful, intellectual book. It reminded me quite a lot of Blackouts, actually, in terms of like the playfulness of the form that the book takes, because it is written largely as verse. So like you have a section there from the boys that's quite sparse verse, and then you've got the next page there with Dad, and you get these three perspectives throughout. You get Dad, boys, and Crow. And essentially they are all just Crow is there to try and help Dad especially deal with his grief and the loss of his wife. And I thought it was so clever, but so emotionally raw. I think sometimes books that are in this sort of style, their cleverness can hold you at a distance, and they can feel a little bit more like head over heart. But there isn't even really a story to it. But because it's so short, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there is a journey, there is growth, there is transition from the beginning to the end, that's really beautifully handled. But not a lot happens. You are very much sort of plunged into this grief and the missing of this woman. And I really liked the way that the boys were dealt with, because at points in their sections they're speaking with one voice, and there are moments when they start to sort of diverge from each other. But having, even throughout the book, even as the characters get older, they're still titled as boys. And I think that worked so well with the sort of mirroring partly the kind of arrested development that you can experience when you lose a parent young, but also the idea that a parent, when your children, no matter what age your children are, it can feel like they are, you know, they stay your boys or your kids or your whoever. And I loved that. There was a lot throughout the book of the episodes sort of existing with, if you imagine them as like a triad, so you've got like dad, boys, crow. There's a lot where like two of them are interacting and one's not there, or then these two, and so you're constantly rearranging yourself around the absence of one of these, which again sort of spoke to the fact that they were all sort of orbiting this wider absence of the mother. And there were just so many like beautiful moments where I was just like, oh God, that just captures it so beautifully. So this, for example, is a section from about halfway through from the boys. And it says, we all used to get a lot of trouble from Mum for flecking the mirror with toothpaste. For a few years we flecked and spat and overbrushed, and our mirror was a white speckled mess, and we all took guilty pleasure in it. One day Dad cleaned the mirror and we all agreed it was excellent. Various other things slipped. We pissed on the seat, we never shut drawers. We did these things to miss her, to keep wanting her. And you're like, But the, what I should have spoken to you about earlier as well is the reason Crow manifests is because the dad is writing a book about Ted Hughes's Crow. So that's sort of the like link. And again, I really thought that I wasn't going to kind of like understand or appreciate that, but I think in lots of ways it could be about any kind of, when you've experienced any kind of trauma or loss and you look to rearrange your life in a way that feels different to what it was. Because if things stay the same, that glaringly obvious missing piece is going to feel it's going to loom so large. But if you focus over here instead, that you might be able to convince yourself that that's not happening. But it meant you also got, but I imagine there is all sorts of intertextuality going on that I did miss. But I just kind of wanted to reassure people that if you were not picking this up because you think you needed to read Crow, you don't have to. Having said that, I have started listening to the audiobook of Crow because it's available on Everand and it's read by Ted Hughes actually. I actually avoided Ted Hughes for a really long time because I was a Plath girly, and I felt, you know, I was Team Plath, so I wasn't going to read Ted Hughes. But it's interesting. I don't know what I thought Crow was going into it, but I think there are obviously, Max Porter is incredibly intelligent, and there are all sorts of things that having read a bit of Crow now, I can see even more stuff that's going on. So I'm not saying that you gain nothing by having read Crow, but I am saying that I read this without that knowledge, and I still really, really enjoyed it and thought it was a special, heartbreaking, human, odd, clever, quirky in a good way, not an obnoxious way, and adventurous and playful thing. I think Crow's character is so sometimes sinister, sometimes like he's quite a low-key sort of character, and yeah, I really loved it, and it's sort of cemented for me how much when it's done well, how much I morbidly love reading about grief. And I think actually all four of the books that I've read in this video have grief as one of the driving forces in the narrative. Obviously, with a title like Grief is a Thing with Feathers, that's like pretty obvious, and this is dealing kind of most acutely with grief. In Blackouts, there is this sort of grief for, well, the imminent death of someone that you care about. That's happening in the book, but also like grieving for the missed opportunities of celebrating stories and people that were not celebrated or understood in their time because society didn't want to see that those people were there, and grieving for that, and grieving for the sort of loss of those contributions, grieving for the fact that those people didn't live to see a world that was more accepting of them. And then Private Rites is really interesting because obviously there is the death of a parent in that, but dealt with very differently. But also this weird grief for a world that is gone and cannot be returned to you. But how when you lose something slowly, when your world sort of slowly starts to dismantle, you actually miss the opportunity for grieving for it because the process of its loss happens so slowly. Like Julia Armfield at the event was talking about, like, she wanted to write this dystopian book where like how there's something very painfully realistic about the fact that the characters are literally, they're in the middle of a dystopia, right? It's clearly a climate dystopia setting. The world is in a bad place, and yet people are just like doing their emails and like going to work and having to show up for like their shitty jobs that they hate, and like the idea that it could be the end of the world and you still have to go to work, like I thought was really interesting. But it was a different kind of existential grief, almost like a grief that we see as a reader but that the characters almost can't see. And then Giovanni's Room, I think, has that sort of, a bit like in Blackouts, that sort of anticipatory grief of David looking, Giovanni is still alive, but because he's in jail and potentially going to be executed, this sort of looking back on, and that person isn't even gone, but you know you're never going to see them again, even if they are still alive, and the grief for that, and the grief at the decisions that you made, and kind of grief at your own selfishness. So this has been a grief-stricken vlog, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you think of them. I would love to know people's thoughts on the ending of Private Rites, but obviously I don't want to spoil things for anyone. So if you are going to comment about that, put a big spoilers for Private Rites and then hit enter a bunch of times, because I do want to talk to you about it. Or if you follow me on Instagram, just DM me on Instagram, which a couple of people have done, because I've already asked on Instagram for people to message me about that book, because I'm not sure. Anyway, I will be sitting down in about 4 days to begin filming the July one of these. I've done this quite late this month. It's been a bit of a chaotic reading time, but enjoyable nonetheless. I hope you agree. And let me know what you got to this month that you've been meaning to read, or if you haven't got to anything this month, what's going to be on your hit list for July? What are you looking to read impatiently? And if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a little thumbs up. That is always very helpful. And if this is your first time here and you want to stick around, hit that subscribe button. And I will see you next week for, I think it will be my June wrap up. And then I think I'm going to do a best books of the year so far. If I can decide what those books are. We'll see. Anyway, see you later, friends. Bye.